As always, the opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of DKI APCSS, the U.S. Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.
Right now, North Korea has the chips. It has the weapons. It has the troops, right? The manpower that Russia needs. So we have to ask the question, why is North Korea making so much effort to strengthen the relationship? I mean, if you look at the institutionalization of this relationship, right, across practically all sectors, at all levels, from people-to-people exchange, from the all the way to the students, the children's union, and the women's union, all the way to the top, at the Kim Jong-un level.
Aloha, and welcome to Dialogue, where conversations shape security. I'm your host, James Minnich, Colonel United States Army retired and professor here at the Daniel K. Inouye Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies in Honolulu, Hawaii. This is episode 48, North Korea's Russia-China play. For decades, North Korea has skillfully managed its relationship with two powerful neighbors, China and Russia. Pyongyang has leveraged their support while fiercely guarding its autonomy. But over the past year, that careful balance has shifted. North Korea's alignment with Russia is accelerating. In 2024, Pyongyang began shipping millions of artillery shells, ballistic missiles, and small arms to Moscow for use in Ukraine. In 2025, it reportedly deployed over 12,000 troops and construction personnel to help rebuild Russia's war-torn Kursk region. And now another 6,000 military engineers and laborers are reportedly en route. Clear signs that Pyongyang is deepening its role in Russia's war effort, openly defying UN sanctions in exchange for reciprocal benefits. So what's the payoff? In short, wheat, oil, military technology, hard currency, and breathing room. Kim Jong-un is securing critical supplies, insulating his regime, and testing just how far the world is willing to look away. But this alignment with Moscow is not a pivot away from Beijing. China remains North Korea's primary economic lifeline, accounting for roughly 98% of its recorded external trade. If Russia is becoming Pyongyang's wartime enabler, China remains its economic anchor. This raises important questions. Can North Korea balance both patrons without surrendering its autonomy? Is Pyongyang playing Moscow and Beijing against each other, or simply hedging in a fragmenting global order? And how should the United States and its allies interpret these developments? The deepening defense ties with Russia, the quiet but persistent reliance on China, and a leader in Kim Jong-un who has not met with a single Western official in 5 years. To help us unpack these issues, I'm joined by Rachel Minyoung Lee, Senior Fellow at the Stimson Center in 38 North and POSCO Visiting Fellow at the East-West Center. For nearly 2 decades, Rachel served as a North Korea analyst with the U.S. government's open source enterprise. Today, she remains one of the sharpest observers of Pyongyang political messaging, foreign policy, and economic maneuvering. So whether you're joining us from Honolulu, Washington, Seoul, or anywhere around the world, thank you for being part of this conversation. Rachel Minyoung Lee, welcome back to Dialogue.
Thank you so much for having me back.
I have been looking forward to this discussion. I've had the benefit of spending some time with you since you've been back on the island. And in fact, we just spent 75 minutes out in our open area on the Lanai talking with a larger group about some of these issues we'll talk about today and even more. But I wonder, maybe you'll take a minute to kind of share with the audience a little bit about yourself, how you came into this space to be an expert in these areas. Please, over to you.
I stumbled into this space. I had no interest in North Korea, actually. I thought I was signing up for a different job.
No, that is stumbling.
And then I got the job, and then I found out that it wasn't really what I had signed up for, but I fell in love with it because looking at North Korean propaganda is like looking for like little puzzle pieces. like gold nuggets in a pile of meaningless words, right? When you talk about propaganda, you talk about separating the wheat from the chaff.
Yeah.
So I fell in love with that. So,
and you did it for almost 20 years.
I did in the government. Yeah.
Yeah. Hope for the, and then you did other things in this space since then. I mean, so you've gone on to several other jobs actually since the one you were just describing, right?
Yes. So since leaving the U.S. government, I was in the private sector for a little bit. And I was also in Vienna, Austria,
Yeah.
working for an NGO called Open Nuclear Network, working on nuclear risk reduction issues.
Wonderful. And then, of course, you come to the island. You know, I was talking to you. I had to look back. I had you here on episode 24. This is 48, exactly 24 episodes since the last one. And so jokingly, we'll have to have you back for the 72nd. But thank you for keeping in touch with us when you're back here.
Well, thank you.
I thought we'd kind of break this discussion up into about three parts today. We'll talk about North Korea and Russia, we'll talk about North Korea and China, and then we'll talk about this strategic comparison and an outlook. And so let's kind of begin with this. I mean, North Korea's rapidly expanding relationship with Russia, a partnership that now extends beyond diplomacy into the front lines of the Ukraine war, as I kind of spoke about. Let me ask you this question. What is Pyongyang gaining in return? And how transformative is this relationship as we think about, you know, economical and military spheres?
Well, James, I think you gave us a really good readout when you were introducing the theme of today's talk. So we know that North Korea has been getting oil shipments, wheat from Russia. We know that North Korea has been getting political cover from Russia on the UN Security Council. We can probably say with a certain level of confidence that they're getting some type of military technology from the Russians, possibly cash for the weapons exports, and now troop dispatch to Russia. So putting all of those things aside, I think the real important question that we should be asking is, what are the longer term benefits that Kim Jong-un sees from his relationship with Russia? Does Kim Jong-un see opportunities beyond Russia? So working through Russia to work with other countries in that same orbit, or as you might call them, like-minded countries. So because the Russia angle is so big, I think we tend to look at just Russia, but I think it is important to look beyond Russia. Also looking at the treaty, the comprehensive treaty that was signed between the two countries in June 24. It covers the gamut of issues, right? From political diplomacy, foreign policy, politics, all the way to cyber cooperation and economic cooperation, trade, investment. So there probably are a lot of things that the two countries have been discussing, right, through the year, through the many talks and exchanges they have been conducting in the last 2 years. I do want to say, and you know, this is a question that inevitably comes up, right, when we talk about North Korea, Russia, right? Is the relationship going to outlast the war in Ukraine? And I think it is a fair question to ask, because this relationship, you know, became stronger with the start of the war in Ukraine. It's a fair question to ask, given everything that we're seeing, at least from the North Korean side. I think it is fair to say that North Korea is eyeing something longer term. Right now, North Korea has the chips. It has the weapons. It has the troops, right? The manpower that Russia needs. Yeah. So we have to ask the question, why is North Korea making so much effort to strengthen the relationship? I mean, if you look at the institutionalization of this relationship, right, across practically all sectors, at all levels, from people to people exchange, you know, from the, all the way to the students, the Children's Union, and the women's union all the way to the top at the Kim Jong-un level. So North Korea is not doing this for the next how many ever months that we're in this war for. There is something beyond that. And I think there's just so much that we don't know. In terms of whether this is sustainable, I think it's going to have to be a lot more than investment from Russia. I think they tried that before. It just didn't really go anywhere. And of course, you can now say that, well, now it's in the interest of both countries to do more economically. But I think what we have to be aware of is the possibility of something deeper on the economic side. So going beyond trade and investment and Russian tourists to North Korea's newly opened beach resort in Wonsan-Gama area.
Beautiful resort. Have you seen pictures of it?
Pictures on TV.
Yeah.
But I think they're going to need more than Russian tourists, right? For this relationship to be more meaningful economically. I think one area that we can think about is North Korea-Russia industrial cooperation, especially on the munitions and defense industry side. Is it a possibility that Russia may use North Korea as a base for munitions production down the road? It may be a possibility, it may not be a possibility, but I think that's maybe one example where, it could have a bigger impact for the North Korean economy. North Korea already has been talking a lot in the last 2 years about revitalizing the munitions and defense industries. And that serves them in 2 ways, right? It helps them to bolster defense, right? And send more weapons to Russia. Secondly, by revitalizing these 2 industries, there may be a trickle-down effect to the civilian economy. So maybe they're not spending as much money to improve the civilian economy, but I think we can expect some kind of a trickle-down effect.
Fascinating to hear you lay that out. As you were doing so, I was kind of thinking about how this relationship has gone through different phases. I mean, obviously, the Soviets at the time and the North Koreans are there together at the beginning. The 25th Division will end up conducting civil affairs as they set up Pyongyang post World War II. Or North Korea, and then there for the elections that'll happen in 48, and the relationship will kind of end up lessening over time. Obviously, when the Soviet Union implodes in 91, the Soviet Union is not thinking of anything, or the newly formed Federation of Russia is only focused on what's happening at home. And North Korea recognizes immediately there's no more friendship prices, there's no much, all this stuff going on. Fortunately for North Korea, China is starting to, come out of its troubled times, internal problems that it had going on. But here we are back in a phase again, and we're going to pull on the China piece here in a little bit, but I like the way you described that, thinking about this beyond just the immediacy of some deals going on and what might be deeper. That's worth thinking about deeply. Thank you for that. Let's pull on some of the things we talk about labor as currency. A surge of North Koreans that are entering Russia under various pretexts, accompanying the formal deployments of military construction units to Kursk. I'm reminded, pre 2019, when UN Security Council Resolution 2397 required all foreign North Korean workers to be sent back home, Russia had a lot. I mean, they had 25,000 workers or so out there. They had significant numbers. And now I read in the news recently that maybe they'll send another 25,000, 30,000 combat forces to Kursk. And they've got, I mentioned in the monologue, the 6,000 or so construction workers. There's significant labor as currency going on with Russia. So How is Pyongyang using these labor exports, official and unofficial, as strategic and financial tools in defiance of the sanctions? Pull on these things I've kind of laid out and give us a little bit more if you might.
So, labor, sending labor overseas, I mean, that has been one of North Korea's beloved ways of earning hard currency, right? I think there is an opportunity, right, beyond the, few thousand or the tens of thousands that they're sending right now, because it's kind of like a blue ocean right now, I would imagine, because we're talking about a war-torn country. So it's just the beginning. So I think this is just the beginning, and they'll be sending even more. So I think those prospects are looking good for Kim Jong-un, and certainly that is going to have an impact on the country. Whether it's solely for the munitions and defense industries, or maybe a little for the civilian economy, and maybe a lot more for those industries, or maybe more for the civilian economy. I would like to add at this juncture one interesting point, which is North Korea's major economic construction project called 20 by 10.
Yeah.
It's called 20 by 10 initiative. Many of you may have heard about it.
Hold on that a little bit and talk about what that is.
The 20 by 10 policy is
about a year old now, right?
Yes, it was announced in January 2024.
Yeah.
And it is a project. The project's mandate is to build modern, local, modern industrial factories in 20 cities and counties per year for the next 10 years. Yeah. Their first year is done, so we're talking about the next 9 years. That's a huge commitment.
It is.
It is a huge. Basically, over the next 10 years, they will have covered the entire country.
Yes.
So the goal of this project is to reduce the gap between Pyongyang and the rest of the country, given the huge gap between the living standards of people living in Pyongyang and people who live in the local provinces.
When I originally heard this a year or so ago, maybe I wrongly conflated, but I kind of thought about Park Chung-hee's Saemaul project, where they went to modernize the new villages outside of Seoul to kind of raise the standard of living, and it felt like a bit of a pull on that. But tell more about what you're thinking.
Yes, so the 20 by 10. The reason I brought that up is because of the timing of the launch of the project. So we're talking about a huge project with a lot of resources that are required to make this work. Came on the heels of improving relations with North Korea and Russia, right? January 2024. So what happened in the months before that? Shoigu visited Pyongyang, toured a defense exhibition hall with Kim Jong-un, where Kim Jong-un was showing off weapons. And then we hear about North Korea shipping weapons to Russia. And then in September 2023, of course, we saw Kim Jong-un and Putin having a summit in the Russian Far East.
Yes.
So amid the burgeoning relations between the two countries, Kim Jong-un launched this project that apparently, according to North Korean propaganda, there was pushback from the top leadership against this project because there were so many other ongoing projects that they were reluctant to take it on. But Kim Jong-un took it upon himself to announce it at the parliament in January. So I think it would be logical to assume that some of the money coming in from Russia is going into the project. And so we're talking again about an example of the Russia-North Korea connection having an impact, however little, on not just the North Korean economy, but Kim Jong-un's, how he's thinking about things, about his decisions and calculus. Also, there have been reports about North Korea's trade with Russia increasing. According to Russian sources, trade between the two countries increased 9-fold in 2023, reached a new record high in 2024. Of course, that pales compared to North Korea's trade with China. But again, you can see how, North Korea is making these efforts, and it's making some progress towards creating more leverage or space for itself, so that it's not solely dependent on China or mostly dependent on China.
That's fascinating. The scope of revenue made in these arms deals, these soldiers and stuff over the last couple of years, it's difficult to pin it down exactly what it is. But as I understand it, the range of amounts, on a low end, maybe $5 billion, and a high end, maybe $20 billion. That's not insignificant. And I actually hadn't drawn the connection that you laid out about use of those funds in the 2010 project. Certainly many other things that it goes into. You talked about the development of the defense industrial base, North Korea, and there's upwards of 200 defense companies throughout North Korea. And without a doubt, this type of capital going back in will improve that as well. And the things we could talk about if we were just talking about Russia today. So I will stop that there. But I do want to ask at least one more thing before you switch over on and talk about China. I want to ask about and I want to pull on what you were talking about here, and so you kind of ask is this a recovery or is this a mirage? These construction projects you're talking about, these trade upticks, state media claims that you're talking about. Is this growth sustainable, or is it temporary lift that's driven by this logistics? So you laid it out there, but let me just ask you the question. Is it sustainable, or do you see a shelf life on this and that? People ask it this way. Will the relationship with North Korea and between North Korea and Russia, will it last through the war? Will it only go to the end of the war? Is there something longer than this? I feel from the things you've said that you kind of see this going a little bit longer, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. Say more.
I do see it going longer, but in order for the North Korea-Russia relationship to actually have an substantial economic impact on North Korea, I think it's going to take a lot more than the cash inflow from Russia, because we're talking about sustainability over time. I think what Kim Jong-un is eyeing is maybe by revitalizing the munitions and defense industries, he also takes that, whatever revenue is made by doing that, to also revitalize the civilian economy. So ultimately revitalizing the civilian economy through the revitalization of the munitions and defense industries. Now, is that a healthy solution to fixing the ailing economy or improving the ailing economy? I don't think so, because I don't think it's structural. I think it's just putting a different Band-Aid, every 2 or 3 days, if you have like a scratch on your skin, right? Instead of actually getting it fixed.
Yeah.
So unless Kim Jong-un can find a way to fundamentally restructure the economy, I think there is a shelf life with or without a longer term relationship with Russia. Unless we're talking about a situation where Russia and North Korea economic cooperation is elevated to a point where there's a lot more complementarity between the two economies. And that's going to take a very long time, even if they get to that point of seeking that complementarity.
Russia, without a doubt, is capturing the headlines, and it captured the first almost half of this talk here. But China remains North Korea's economic bedrock, and so let's turn now. Let's have that discussion. So, what do cross-border trade, tourism, and infrastructure activities in 2025 indicate about the resilience of Pyongyang's economic dependence on Beijing?
So interestingly, in 2024, according to studies by economic institutes, North Korea's trade with China fell. Not by much, around 3.7%, according to one research study. Not by a lot, and some people think that the increased trade with Russia helped recover some of that. But again, total volume, trade volume between North Korea and Russia pales completely when you compare North Korea's trade with China. And North Korea is heavily reliant on China for the everyday necessities that they can't get from Russia, with the exception of, maybe fertilizer or, oil or wheat. But everything else has to come from China, or has been coming from China. So I don't think North Korea is seeking to replace China with Russia. I think he's taking this dual track approach where he's using these two countries for different purposes. So trade with China, that's not really going to go away. Although I think Kim Jong-un wants to reduce this heavy reliance on China, right, for economic and trade issues. I think that Russia serves other purposes, as I mentioned. Russia, we know, is not afraid to violate sanctions to help out North Korea. When Putin went to Pyongyang in June 2024, he talked about coming up with some kind of a mutual payment system between the two countries, kind of like BRICS Pay, I think is what he was referring to. I don't know if that's within the realm of possibility. I don't hear North Korea talking about that very much these days. But if an arrangement like that could be had, maybe Kim Jong-un sees an opportunity in that. But more than that, I think Kim Jong-un is eyeing diversifying his trade partners, economic cooperation partners. So going beyond Russia, right? Reaching out to Russia's friends and allies. I think Belarus is one very good example. We have seen North Korea stepping up relations with Belarus in the last 1 year. We have seen Belarusian delegations visiting Pyongyang like we've never seen them. They hold like economic talks. So I think these are the opportunities, again, going back to the question of, what does Kim Jong-un think he's getting from this relationship? Mm-hmm. Maybe it's not an immediate return on investment, but, I think it is an investment that he is making to hedge. I think maybe hedging or de-risking is the right word.
Okay, so let's say that's going on. Is China uneasy about this this newfound relationship with Russia, or is it just allowing Moscow to bear more political and economic risks, like you described? They're not worried about going afoul of the international community.
I think it's both.
Okay.
I don't think China. I'm not a China expert, but I have to assume that China probably doesn't want North Korea and Russia to get too close. But you have a really good point in that from China's point of view, the broader goal is the same, right? Anti-US, anti-Western global order. So in that sense, what's wrong with having Moscow taking on the bad guy role, right? Because China does want to come across as being a responsible member of the international community, wants to come across as respecting the rule of law, international law, and so forth. And, Russia doesn't really care about that anymore. So why not let Russia take that role, because at the end of the day, the broader goal of going against this Western and US-led global order, that remains the same, I think, for all these three countries. The details, I think, are different, in terms of what specifically they want each country, but the broader goal remains the same. But I have to think that the two countries getting too close could cause trouble for China. Already is, because, this relationship is bringing a lot of attention to the region. So I don't think that China's too happy about that. But if China's not happy, but it's not doing anything, or maybe it can't do anything. So then that brings up the question of, does China have as much leverage over Russia and North Korea as we think it does? Or is it bothered, but it's not bothered to a point where it feels like it has to step its foot down?
We have often ascribed to China the influence it has on North Korea. I know we have. Let me ask this regarding comparing these partnerships. Mm-hmm. So if you're Kim Jong-un, which partner do you trust more? And how does their offers that they're giving him differ in his value of in what he values or what he risks? And so
North Korea is it doesn't like to put itself in a straitjacket, right? So it's ideologically, when you think about like the Chuche ideology, and we don't really associate them with pragmatism, but they're pretty practical. I mean, they'll do what is best for their country at the end of the day, like any other country. And ultimately, I don't think North Korea completely trusts China or Russia. I mean, we hear Kim Jong-un, toasting Putin and talking about how he's, blessed to have a friend like Putin. But we also should remember the complicated history, right, between North Korea and Russia, just as North Korea has with China, so many vicissitudes. And already, just as North Korea is worried a lot about the country's over-reliance on China on the economic side, I think North Korea is already uncomfortable about becoming technologically reliant on Russia. So Kim Jong-un has said publicly, in military institutions, that that North Korea should not become dependent on foreign countries for technology. And this came out in the midst of all these international news reports about North Korea receiving military, technology transfers from Russia. So I think there's already a level of discomfort within the regime, including Kim himself, the concern that one day, just as it is reliant on China for trade, right, that it may become too dependent on Russia. So, that's maybe a vulnerability in the relationship. But I think that is something to keep in mind. So it's not a friendship without limits, right? I mean, although we use that for China and Russia.
Yeah. Let's talk a minute about sanctions and strategic space. So China and Russia, I mean, they are the primary enablers of North Korea's sanctions evasion. So how do the differing enforcement behaviors expand Pyongyang's room to maneuver? And what are the broader implications for global sanctions credibility?
Well, I think the fact that China and Russia have pretty much looked the other way, and in Russia's case, actively helped North Korea violate sanctions. I think that has given North Korea a tremendous breathing space, right? And that has, unfortunately, huge implications for nuclear talks and North Korea's relationship with the US. Back in 2018, one of the reasons why North Korea wanted to talk with the US and resolve the nuclear issue was because it wanted sanctions lifted, which North Korea itself has acknowledged. We thought for some immediate economic benefits, we could trade our Yongbyon facility for sanctions lifting, but that is not their position anymore. And guess why? It's because they can bypass sanctions, and these days probably not without too much trouble. And in terms of what this means for the credibility of the global sanctions regime, I think it has dealt a heavy blow to the sanctions regime. But the dilemma is this, right? So then you have people saying, well, then what's the point of enforcing sanctions? I mean, it's a fair question to ask, but then I guess the flip side of that question then is, well, if we don't enforce sanctions, assuming they have some impact, even if that impact is as little as just creating more trouble for North Korea, for their illicit trade, right? Isn't that still something? Isn't that better than nothing?
The sanctions are intended to change behavior and to bring the entity back into acceptable bounds. And so you ask yourself, how do you make that happen? These sanctions have been there for a long time. They haven't done that. And now the authority of the sanctions is obviously being questioned, and the functionality of the Security Council is seems at risk, as well as the P5 can't seem to agree on much.
And the sunsetting, the demise of the UN panel of experts,
Yeah.
that UN organization that used to track, monitor.
It was early last year
the
that
illicit.
and Russia was instrumental in making that happen. China to a smaller degree.
So, that was sort of like the last resort, for just tracking and calling out those entities, and including countries responsible. There's not even that anymore. So what do we do? I honestly don't have an answer. I mean, you have sort of as a replacement of the UN panel of experts, the MSMT, I think it's the multilateral sanctions monitoring team, made up of 11 like-minded countries, including the US, South Korea, Japan, the usual suspects, right?
Yeah.
I don't think it's going too well. I don't think it's very effective. There's a credibility issue, right? Because they're not really seen as an objective body because they're like-minded countries. Anything they put out is basically going to be dissed by countries that are skeptical about sanctions anyway. So what do we do? I honestly don't know. I don't have a good answer for that.
Let me pull you on this next one then, and that's as we think about North Korea kind of balancing between these two giants, being China and Russia. And you can ask, you rightly noted that they got to be careful. They're this proverbial shrimp among whales, right? As it were. How do they manage this balancing act over the next 5 years, and then what could disrupt its current strategy over this time as it tries to do this?
Looking out to the next 5 years is, so much happens every single day. I feel like 5 years is like 50 years, like back in the old days. I think a lot will depend on how North Korea's relationship with the US evolves, where China falls in North Korea's calculus, how North Korea, manages its relationships with some of the other potential key stakeholders besides China, Russia, and the US. I think a lot will depend on those and a lot more, but I think those are the key.
I agree with you that I think that we are going to see massive changes in the next 5 years that we probably aren't even thinking about now. And I was thinking, well, we could just go back, replay the episode 24 where we sat down and opined on where we were going and ask us how well we were.
Our prediction was.
Yes, because we've got that on video. We've got a lot of audience questions. Let's pull on some of these. So this first one is asking about response options. So what are plausible U.S. ROC alliance options to respond to North Korea's current Russia-China strategy?
There's a lot of talk going on right now about fundamentally changing the role of the U.S. forces Korea. I wonder if now is a good time for that because of the increasing threats of North Korea, and given the fact that it's becoming assertive. Kim Jong-un has become so much more emboldened because of the fact that the economy is not doing too badly. And the many diplomatic wins, the international boost that North Korea has gotten by participating in the war, in Russia's war against Ukraine. And you have South Korea, whose alliance at the moment is being tested as South Korea tries to negotiate the tariff rate with the Trump administration. Just growing skepticism about the reliability of U.S. extended deterrence. If it's good to go under the Trump administration at some point in the future, if some other president comes along and wants to do something more drastic, what does that look like for South Korea? So going back to your question, I personally, and maybe I'm biased because I'm a Korea's expert, but I do wonder, because of the growing threats from North Korea, whether it is wise, if this is the best timing for the U.S. forces Korea's strategic flexibility, where we see them more involved regionally, and where South Korea takes on a greater role in terms of defense against North Korea. So I think now is time to maybe double down on U.S. ROK allied, military posture and extended deterrence, especially given the fact that South Korea has conventional capabilities, but is up against a country. I have to be careful in how I say this. A country with nuclear weapons.
Yes. I spoke at as a panelist last week, and we'll put that out on talking on this very issue of the ROK-US alliance and OPCON transfer. And we'll put that up on as a bonus episode here in the next few days, and the audience can take a look at that. But let me pull you on this next question. It's asking about regional spillover. So how is the growing cooperation between North Korea, Russia, and China, how is it affecting security dynamics in Southeast Asia and even the broader Indo-Pacific?
I think so. Southeast Asia it's a complicated region, right? Yeah. You have some countries where U.S. influence is huge, and then you have other countries that are very pro-China. Maybe you have more countries that are becoming pro-China because of what's been happening in the Middle East and whatnot. I think, again, just as we've been talking about North Korea taking advantage of the widening rift between the U.S. and both China and Russia, I think this gives room for North Korea to step up relations with like-minded countries in Southeast Asia. I think Vietnam is maybe one country that we should take a closer look at, when it comes to North Korea's footprint in Southeast Asia.
His trade relations has been rising with that country as well.
I believe so.
Yeah.
And of course, we know that Russia also has been trying to improve relations with Vietnam. So it's not just Vietnam, but again, going back to my point earlier about North Korea sort of using Russia as that nexus, right, through which it can expand and improve relations with other countries. And because of North Korea's historical ties and ideological ties to some of the Southeast Asian countries, and their ties also to China, I think that while giving North Korea more, I guess, diplomatic space to try to increase its presence, to increase its diplomatic say or just becoming a bigger regional player, right? There's that part of the equation, and also how that maybe feeds into China's calculus. How does, we may just brush off, like write off North Korea as like, oh, but they're not even like a minor player, diplomatically. How much diplomatic power do they have? But we may be surprised, as we tend to be with North Korea.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think this next question, we might have gotten to it well enough. It's kind of asking about the strategic autonomy outlook, and it's asking about, given North Korea's history of balancing Beijing and Moscow, how do you foresee Pyongyang managing these relations going forward? I feel like you've kind of hit that. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to say in that field?
We talk about North Korea, or Kim Jong-un rather, playing by the old Cold War playbook that Kim Il-sung used, right? This is not the Cold War, though.
No.
I feel like Kim Jong-un has drawn some lessons, but I feel like he's crafting his own playbook. I'm not sure what North Korea stands to gain in this day and age by playing Russia off against China. Because during the Cold War, China was a junior partner to the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Things have changed. Right now, I mean, Russia is widely regarded as the junior partner.
Yes.
So what does North Korea have to gain by playing them off? I'm not really sure what it's gaining exactly. During the Cold War, going back, shuttling back and forth between those two major powers, okay, maximizing what they can get from each country. I don't think that that's the case anymore. So I think he is not really pitting China against Russia, but rather I think he's looking for the best outcome from each country.
Yeah.
I do want to go back a little bit to China and the North Korea-China relationship. We have seen, and I think in my last episode, I did talk about North Korea-China relationship becoming strained.
Yeah.
Since the fall of 2023. We don't know exactly what happened, but that's when we started to see the bad signs. Last year was the 75th anniversary of diplomatic relations between the two countries, and nothing significant happened. And the messages between the two leaders remained pretty standard, if not cold. This year, there were reports from the South Korean Unification Ministry earlier this year about there being signs of North Korea trying to improve relations with China. If there are signs behind the scenes, we're not seeing that in North Korean propaganda, which to me translates into North Korea's, if they are indeed trying to improve relations, they're not really ready to commit to that line just yet because they're not talking about it in public. In fact, I think that in some ways a relationship may have gotten worse because of a recent report in North Korean media about Kim Jong-un visiting the Friendship Tower in Pyongyang, the one that's dedicated to fallen Chinese soldiers during the Korean War. Very, very cold. Not even the standard language they use every year when he visits the Friendship Tower about paying the highest respects to China and the fallen soldiers. I think this year he said, we will not forget the sacrifice of the Chinese, the fallen soldiers, but that was really about it. Just 3 lines, very short and very cold. And if you're seeing that from Kim Jong-un, you have to wonder what is going on. And so again, the question is, I think the bigger question is this part of the vicissitudes that we have been seeing? As we have seen so many times, in the history of North Korea, China, where, some years a relationship is really bad, other years they're not. Or, again, is there a more fundamental shift in how North Korea views China? So earlier this year, and this was a term that I thought was very interesting that North Korea used in reporting on its missile launches, January 2025. North Korea, in the same report, used hostile forces, which would refer to the US, South Korea, China, and countries that are friendly to those 3 countries. In addition to the standard hostile forces language, they also used adversaries, other adversaries in the region. So, that makes you wonder what other adversaries. Could you be talking about China? Simply because of the relationship and how bad it has been over the past 2 years, and given the fact that it's no secret that North Korea does view China as a threat, but for them to actually say it, no less in a Kim Jong-un report. It was a report where Kim Jong-un was inspecting or giving guidance on a missile launch. So, for them, it's one thing for them to think about. It's kind of like denuclearization, right? A lot of people will argue that North Korea never intended to denuclearize, at least not completely. So what is the big deal about them publicly announcing that they're going to, in effect, not carry out denuclearization? From a propaganda point of view, there is a big difference between, what you're thinking but not saying, and what you're actually saying, because in that, that provides you with the basis for taking the next steps.
Okay, a lot to think about there. Let's pull on some questions that's asking about military in Ukraine stuff. So this first one on that is asking about the military impact in Ukraine. To what extent are deployed North Korean troops in Russia making a difference at the strategic and tactical levels?
I think in Ukraine, all we can do is to rely on reports coming out of Ukraine and, other Western media. And according to them, North Koreans may not have been that big of help initially, but that they have adjusted very quickly.
Yes.
And I would not be surprised if that really was the case, because North Korea tends to be very resourceful, and they do adapt quickly if need be. And so I do tend to believe those reports. And they didn't send like a few hundred, right? They sent tens of thousands.
Yeah.
So I have to think that they did make an impact in Ukraine. I think the other side of that question, though, and you're probably going to ask this anyway, is what is North Korea gaining from a military operations point of view, right?
Combat experience.
By combat experience. Operation of drones, that kind of experience in a battlefield, right?
Yeah.
Not in a simulated, in a simulation, which is different. And that's more than you can say for South Korea. So if there should be a military conflict on the Korean Peninsula, I know we like to talk about the antiquated weapons, of North Korea and so forth, but we do have to think about what that means, right? Should there be a conflict, because I do think that it is going to have a negative impact on South Korea. Maybe not a decisive negative impact, but the fact that South Korea hasn't had that experience for a very long time, which North Korea now has, and has taken back to their own country. And ever since North Korea started to dispatch troops to Ukraine, one consistent theme in Kim Jong-un's public remarks when he's in a military unit, any military related or at a military training facility, is the modernization of the military. That is a key and consistent theme.
Yes.
So I think it would be logical to assume that they're gaining not only combat experience, but how they're, when they bring that back with them, how are they, applying that to their own military, whether it's the training methods, the training guidelines, or even the way that, that these units are organized. I think it's all of it.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that the combat experience is going to be significant, that it will vastly influence their tactics going forward. The use of drones has had a significant effect on the battlefield. I think we watch this space because I think there's a lot that's happening here, and there's a recognition that unlike their adversary to the South Koreans, they are not getting that type of experience. And so, no, I think you're right. Let's take one more question, and this one is asking about sanctions effectiveness. So, have UN and US sanctions on North Korea been effective? And if not, are there, maybe this is the part we haven't hit already in our earlier discussion, but are there viable alternatives that could further isolate or constrain the regime? So we kind of spoke about sanctions before, but maybe you just pull on this piece. If not that, then what? And then maybe there's nothing but the what?
I mean, ideally, I think you would have sanctions that work. because those sanctions were put in place for a reason. But as we've talked about, they haven't worked for a while. So then, what is the point of having them? Earlier, I did mention that they may not be as effective as we would like them to be, but maybe it's better to have them than not have them at all. So, better to have some barriers in place rather than not having any barriers in place. Ideally, and I say ideally because I don't think that this is easy to achieve, but we talked about earlier how China and Russia are the biggest enablers. So ideally, you would work with them and try to persuade them to, to work with the rest of the international community to enforce these sanctions. But we know that that is not going to happen for the foreseeable future. So then what?
Yeah.
Then what? The MSMT, as I mentioned, is not really going very well. It doesn't look like. Is there a way to try to bring North Korea out? And, this is, if the North Koreans heard me saying this right now, I don't think they'd be very happy because they would think, oh, that's like reform and opening, and they have an allergic reaction to that. If the sanctions aren't going to work and they're already kind of doing the things that were designed to keep them from doing those things anyway, is it then maybe better to focus on improving US DPRK relations so that by improving the relationship, you naturally, as a natural extension of that, you eventually lift sanctions. And North Korea can then go about legitimately, carrying out trade. And you bring them out into the international system and help them actually fundamentally improve the economy. A lot of people are skeptical about North Korea's, Kim Jong-un's intentions about improving the economy. Some people are skeptical that North Korea, Kim Jong-un has no intention at all of improving the economy. That his ultimate goal is to keep his people starving so that they become more obedient. He can keep them in check and, keep them obedient because hungry people tend to be obedient. Based on my reading of North Korean propaganda, I think Kim Jong-un is genuine about improving the economy. I don't think we should dismiss that as, he doesn't have that intention.
I agree.
So maybe the best way to sort of not even have to talk, best way is to maybe focus on how we can improve that relationship, because I think that is the starting point. But unfortunately, the US doesn't really have that many cards to play. So even if the US and North Korea were to sit down at a dialogue table, I am skeptical that there's going to be anything that comes out of that, unless unless the US fundamentally changes its policy toward North Korea to one that scraps denuclearization. I am not calling for that policy. I'm just saying, from North Korea's point of view, there is no way they will ever sit down with the US that even has denuclearization anywhere on the agenda.
17, 18, 19, and 20, in those years, I was writing about efforts at trying to bring North Korea out and turning it from foe to friend. And concern I had then was if we don't do that, we would find ourselves in a future that resembles where we are today, and here we are. And so I worry about what the future may be. This has been a wonderful time together. I like to ask guests if they have a book recommendation. Maybe you might have one, or an article, or podcast that you might recommend to the group. Anything?
I recently read an article by Sang-Soo Lee when he wrote for Foreign Policy about why we need to craft a completely different policy toward North Korea because of all of the fundamental changes that we have seen on the geopolitical front.
Yeah.
The geopolitical alignments. So I think that the readers may find that useful. I enjoyed reading it.
And I'll make mention, you actually, I think next week when you return back to Stimson Center, you will be on a panel and you'll talk about the 2010 project that North Korea is doing. And so people could tune in and watch that as well.
Thank you for the promotion, James.
You're welcome. Thank you for being here, Rachel.
Well, thank you for having me back. Thank you.
As we conclude today's dialogue, we've explored how North Korea is navigating a strategic relationship with both Russia and China, leveraging each for different benefits while attempting to preserve autonomy. These conversations shape security. Join us on August 11th when I sit down with Dr. Andrea Mulgy, a professor here at the center and an expert on South Asia, geopolitics, and conflict security. So at that episode, episode 49, we'll talk Maldives, small states, big states. We'll unpack how Mali leverages geography, diplomacy, and economic strategy to assert its agency and intensify great power competition. On behalf of all of us at DKI APCSS, thank you for being a part of this important dialogue. I'm James Minnich, and until we meet again, aloha oe. As always, the opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of DKI APCSS, the U.S. Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.